They say betrayal is loud, a slammed door, a shouted insult, a moment you can point to and say, there, that's where it all broke. But for me, it began softly, the kind of quiet only the forgotten truly hear. When Michael and Amanda moved in, it was meant to be temporary. That was the word Amanda used, tight-lipped and already annoyed, even as I welcomed them with open arms. Just a few weeks until we get back on our feet, Michael had said, kissing my forehead. He still smelled like aftershave and laundry detergent, a scent I'd loved since he was a boy. I wanted to believe it would be fine. I wanted to be the mother who made space, the mother who understood. But I knew Amanda never really liked me. Not in the way a daughter-in-law sometimes pretends to. No, with Amanda the dislike was studied, polite but razor-edged. It started small. My blue tea mug, the one with the faded hydrangeas Michael had painted in 3rd grade, vanished from the kitchen. In its place, a set of pristine white mugs, all matching, sterile, soulless. Then my chair, the soft green armchair Charles used to sit in, was missing from the den. I found it days later in the garage, covered with a plastic sheet, as if it were diseased. I thought we could make the space more modern, Amanda said when I asked about it, her voice a honeyed lie. Neutral tones, easier on the eyes. I nodded. What else could I do? I was outnumbered in my own home. Still, I kept the peace. That's what women like me are taught to do. Smooth the edges, swallow the discomfort, keep the house warm even when our hearts are chilled. But the chill deepened. One morning, I came down for breakfast and nearly stumbled in shock. Sitting at my dining table were 2 unfamiliar faces, Amanda's parents, Douglas and Linda. Their laughter echoed through the house, full and comfortable, as if they'd always belonged. I blinked, confused. "Oh, good morning," I said, my voice too soft. Amanda turned from the stove, her lips painted in that sharp coral smile. "Didn't Michael tell you? They'll be staying with us for a while, just until their kitchen renovation is done. Shouldn't be more than a few weeks." I looked at Michael. He couldn't meet my gaze. He shrugged and muttered something about it being last minute. No one asked if I was okay with it. No one seemed to remember it was my house. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the framed photo of Charles on the dresser. He was smiling in the picture, arms around me, our backyard glowing behind us. "Tell me I'm not imagining this," I whispered. "Tell me I'm not vanishing." The next evening, I got my answer. I was walking past the staircase when I heard Amanda's voice, low and muffled behind the door to Michael's old room, now their room. "She's old," she said, laughing. "She'll move on soon enough." Michael didn't respond. Or maybe he did, and I just couldn't bear to hear it. I stood there for a long time, frozen, fingers curled tightly around the banister. It felt like something had cracked. Not in the house, but inside me. I'd spent 30 years in this home. I'd cooked every Thanksgiving meal, bandaged every scraped knee, lit every birthday candle, and now I was a nuisance, a placeholder, a piece of worn-out furniture waiting to be moved out. I didn't cry. Not then. Crying would have given it shape, made it real. Instead, I returned to my room, closed the door gently, and sat down at my desk. There, I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the envelope, old and yellowed, the flap still sealed. It was from Charles. I hadn't read it in years. I didn't read it then either. I just held it in my lap. The house was alive with other people's laughter downstairs, but I, the one who had lived in its bones, was already being forgotten. It too wasn't loud, the way things sometimes break. No, this was quieter. Like a porcelain plate dropped onto thick carpet, intact on the surface but cracked all the way through. I didn't know it then, but something had awakened in me. Something old and sharp and calm. The kind of strength that waits. The house started to shift around me, as if the walls were gently pushing me out, inch by inch, day by day. Amanda's mother, Linda, had a flair for pastels. Within a week, my home began looking like the inside of a retirement brochure. The rich oak curtains I had hand-sewn after, Charles passed, gone, replaced by gauzy beige ones that didn't block the sun or the silence. My walls, once adorned with family photographs and quiet watercolor landscapes, now bore garish floral prints in gold leaf frames. I remember walking past the hallway one morning only to stop in confusion. Charles's portrait, the one from our 40th anniversary where his tie matched my dress and his smile still held the world together, was gone. In its place was a mirror, decorative and soulless. "Gives the room a brighter feel," Linda said when I found it leaning against the hallway wall. "He was the heart of this house," I whispered. She just smiled that smile people use when they think you've already lost the argument. I was told to knock before entering the living room. "It's just that. Sometimes we host Zoom calls or have guests," Amanda explained. "Guests? In my living room?" Michael didn't meet my eyes when I told him how strange it all felt. He only said, "It's not forever, Mom. Let's not make a big deal out of little things." But it wasn't little. Not to me. They started serving me meals on a tray. Linda would knock softly on my door and say, "We thought you might prefer some quiet," before setting a plate on the side table. The first time it happened, I thought it was a mistake, but the second, the third, eventually I stopped coming downstairs altogether. The dining table, once the heart of the house, now beat without me. I tried to reclaim small things. I rehung Charles's portrait in my bedroom. I brewed my own tea with the last of the jasmine leaves I'd kept hidden in a tin behind the flour. I watched old films on my laptop, huddled beneath the afghan my mother had crocheted before she lost her hands to arthritis. But the house kept rejecting me like a body expelling a splinter. And I felt it, the ache of being pushed out, not with malice, but with passive, patient precision. Thanksgiving sealed it. I'd always hosted, always. Turkey stuffed with apples and rosemary, cranberry sauce with orange zest, my sweet potato casserole with the pecan crust. For 30 years, people had filled these walls with laughter, and I had loved every single chaos-drenched minute. But that year, the silence was sharp, too sharp. I stepped outside that morning for a walk, needing the air, needing to not feel so invisible. When I reached the corner market, a neighbor stopped me. "Lovely gathering at your place today," she said. I blinked. "What gathering?" "Oh, I thought you knew. Saw all the cars. Amanda posted about it this morning. Beautiful table setting, really." I walked home slowly. When I reached the house, I stood across the street, just beyond the hedges. Through the front window, I saw them. 20 or so people, plates in hand, wine glasses lifted, Michael smiling faintly in the corner. Not a single face turned toward the door. I went back to my room without unlocking it. They didn't even notice I'd been gone. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, my dinner tray untouched beside me. The turkey was dry. The cranberry sauce was the canned kind. I could tell from the ridges. I tried to speak to Michael the next day. Waited for a moment alone in the hallway and said, "Why didn't anyone tell me about dinner?" He sighed, rubbed his temples. "Amanda said you preferred quiet, and you've been keeping to yourself." Keeping to myself. As if that were a decision I had made. As if I hadn't been carefully edged out, one placemat at a time. "I would have made the sweet potatoes," I whispered. He opened his mouth, closed it, walked away. Amanda always needed him. Whether it was the leaky sink or grocery runs or emotional support during her Pilates class, Michael was constantly in motion. Never present. Never fully mine anymore. The next week I went to make tea and found the kettle gone. Too old, Amanda said. We got an electric one now, safer. She meant for me. I wasn't to be trusted with fire anymore, apparently. One afternoon, I found my sewing box in the garage. I'd kept it beside the reading chair in the den, the one they'd moved out months ago. Everything I used to love had been shuffled, boxed, or stored. Not thrown away. No, that would have been too obvious. Just moved. Removed from sight. From meaning. I sat in the cold garage that evening, surrounded by memories sealed in Rubbermaid containers. I opened the sewing box and ran my fingers over the worn tomato pin cushion. Charles had once called it my battlefield. So many pricks, so many little wounds sealed in cotton and time. That's what this was, wasn't it? Not a battle, not yet. But a quiet war, and I was losing. Still, I kept smiling. Still, I said, "Thank you" when Linda left my tray. Still, I folded the laundry Amanda handed me without complaint, because I needed them to believe I was fading. They thought I didn't see it. How they moved around me like I was furniture. Like an old clock, still ticking in the corner, comforting but unnecessary. But I saw everything, every missing photo, every closed door, every silence. And the thing about silence is, it teaches you to listen carefully, to what is said, and even more, to what isn't. My 78th birthday fell on a Wednesday. No milestone, no grand occasion. Just another quiet day in a house that no longer whispered my name. Still, I woke early, as I always did, and let myself feel hopeful for a while. I pressed my slacks, tied a soft scarf at my neck, and baked a small lemon cake from scratch, the same one Michael used to request every year when he was little. I set the table carefully. One place setting, a linen napkin folded just so, a single candle in a silver holder Charles had given me on our 20th anniversary. I waited. The clock ticked. The house hummed with other people's footsteps. Door slammed upstairs. I heard Amanda's laughter drift down the staircase, too carefree to remember a birthday, too secure in her place to care. I sliced the cake anyway. Just a small piece. My hands trembled when I lifted the fork, not from age, but from the ache of invisibility. No one came. Not a knock. Not a card. Not even from Michael. The day passed in a gray blur. I told myself I didn't expect anything, that it was just another Wednesday. But I had lit the candle, hadn't I? That's the thing about hope. It makes fools of even the wisest hearts. It was nearly dark when Amanda entered without knocking. Her heels clicked on the wooden floor, like a countdown. "We need to talk," she said. I looked up from my armchair, where I'd been knitting a shawl no one had asked for, my hands stilled. "We need more space," she said crisply, arms crossed. "My parents are staying permanently." I blinked. "I see." She took a breath. "It's getting crowded. You know, at your age, it might be time to consider other arrangements. We've looked into assisted living options. They're actually quite nice." I sat there, candle still burning beside a half-eaten piece of lemon cake, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly disposable. Amanda didn't flinch. Michael stood behind her, leaning against the doorframe. He didn't speak, not even when I turned to him. His eyes met mine only once. I saw a flicker of shame. Then nothing. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. That would have given her satisfaction. I rose slowly and said, "All right." Amanda looked momentarily confused, as if she expected a fight. I gave her none. Instead, I took down the photo of Charles from my nightstand, folded 3 blouses, into a worn suitcase and placed my good shawl, the navy one with the pearl buttons, on top. That was all I took, not out of defeat, but out of calculation. Some goodbyes don't need words. They speak in silence, the kind that rings louder than any slammed door. That night, I rang the bell at Ruth's house. She answered in her robe, mascara smudged under her eyes, holding a mug of tea. "Oh, honey," was all she said before opening her arms. I slept on her couch, or tried to. The ceiling in her guest room had a long crack running across it like a question. I stared at it for hours, not thinking, just breathing. There, in the stillness of someone else's kindness, something shifted. Not rage, not sorrow, clarity. They didn't want me in that house. But that house, it still belonged to me. That truth settled inside me like a stone in a river, unmoving, solid, unbothered by the currents that had tried to wash me away. I didn't need to scream to be heard. I only needed to remember who I was. The woman who built a life from scratch, who stitched curtains, cooked feasts, held a man's hand through his last breath, who raised a boy, taught him kindness, and handed him the keys to a home built on love, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to take those keys back. It was over a chipped teacup and a quiet morning when Ruth said it. We were sitting on her back porch, wrapped in mismatched cardigans, watching the early light settle into the trees. She stirred honey into her tea, her hands still graceful despite the years. "Didn't Charles leave everything in your name?" she asked casually, as if she hadn't just dropped a stone into still water. I looked up. The words hung there between us, rippling the silence. I think so," I said, frowning slightly. But I never checked. After he passed, I couldn't bear to open the boxes. Ruth gave me a look. The kind of look only a lifelong friend can give you. One that says you've been quiet long enough. "You should check," she said. "Because if that house is yours, they didn't kick you out. They trespassed." I didn't respond. But something inside me shifted again. Not like a crack this time, but a hinge slowly opening. The next morning, I took the bus downtown. I wore the same coat I'd worn to Charles's memorial, not out of sadness, but because I needed to feel his presence. Something about the weight of it grounded me. The safe deposit box was where we'd left it, nestled in the steel belly of the bank vault. My hands trembled as I turned the key, more from memory than fear. Inside were documents layered in tidy folders, some yellowed, some crisp. I sifted through insurance forms, birth certificates, old bonds, and then, there it was. The deed. My name. Only my name. Clear as spring water. Not Michael and Amanda. Not the family trust. Just me. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't shared. It wasn't borrowed. It was mine. Legally. Entirely. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. The air cold on my skin. The ink seemed to hum. A quiet affirmation of something I'd nearly forgotten. I still mattered. I still owned something. I still had a choice. And then, just beneath the deed, I found the envelope. It was tucked flat against the bottom of the box, sealed, yellowed at the corners, with my name written in Charles's neat, looping hand. I sat on a bench outside the bank before I opened it. The street noise blurred around me. Cars passed, pigeons cooed at my feet. Life moved, as it always does, indifferent. But I was still. Inside the envelope was a short letter, dated 2 weeks before he passed. "My dearest Nora, if they ever forget who built this home, remind them. Kindly, but firmly. You gave that house its soul, no one else, not me, not our son. You. If the day comes where someone makes you feel small in your own space, take it back, quietly, with grace. But take it back, you are not a guest in your own life. And you never were. All my love, always. Charles, I don't remember the moment I began to cry. I only know I sat there for nearly an hour, weeping into my gloves, the letter clutched against my chest. They weren't tears of sadness. Not anymore. They were tears of being seen, finally, deeply, by the one person who had never once tried to shrink me. That night, Ruth didn't press when I came home late. She just handed me a cup of soup and set a warm blanket over my shoulders. I slept with Charles's letter under my pillow. The next morning, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in over a decade. Joan Rothman speaking. Her voice hadn't changed a bit. Clipped, elegant, always 2 steps ahead. "Joan, it's Nora Green." A pause, then warmth. "Nora? My goodness, it's been ages. How are you?" "I've been better," I said honestly. "But I have something you might want to look at." We met that afternoon in her office, a sleek, modern space tucked above a law firm that smelled of eucalyptus and polished floors. She wore a navy pantsuit and tortoiseshell glasses and still had that. Same way of looking at you as if she already knew your answer. I laid the deed on her desk. Then the letter. She read them both in silence, her fingers tapping once, twice, against the wood. When she looked up, her eyes were sharper than I remembered. "You have every legal right," she said. They were tenants at best. Possibly squatters. If we're being honest, that word made me flinch. Squatters. My son. His wife. Her parents. "They moved me out," I said softly. Without raising their voices, they made me invisible. Joan leaned back. "Well, let's make you visible again, shall we?" I looked at her. "You really think I can—" "Not only can you," she said, "you should. And I happen to know a buyer. A single woman who adores historic homes and is looking for something with character. She's willing to pay market, no fuss. And she's a stickler for respecting what came before." I didn't answer right away. Something deep inside me had been asleep for a long time. And now it was stirring. Not vengeance, not anger, just resolve. A kind of knowing. Amanda had moved her parents into my house. She'd replaced the curtains, hidden my chair, fed me on trays like I was something to be managed. And now? Now it was her turn to learn what it meant to be temporary. I smiled. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. A slow, dangerous smile. "Let's proceed," I said. Joan grinned. "I'll draw up the paperwork." On the way home, I stopped at the old bakery near the post office. I hadn't been there in years. The girl behind the counter smiled, said, "What can I get you today?" I bought a small lemon tart. I ate it on Ruth's porch with the sun on my face and Charles's letter folded in my coat pocket. The world hadn't changed. The house hadn't changed. But I had. And soon, they would feel it too. The cottage wasn't large. 2 rooms, a sloped roof, and a porch just big enough for a rocking chair. The wallpaper peeled slightly in the corners, and the heater rattled when it kicked in. But it was mine, or at least mine for now. And that was more than I'd had. In months. It sat on the edge of a sleepy cul-de-sac lined with hydrangea bushes and wind chimes that tinkled like faint laughter in the afternoon breeze. A bluebird had built a nest on the gutter. Every morning I woke to its tiny calls. It felt like a beginning. I started rebuilding, not just my life, but myself. I joined a local knitting circle held every Tuesday at the community center. At first, I just listened, women with silver hair and loud voices trading stories and patterns. But one day, I brought in my old shawl, the navy one with the pearl buttons, and someone asked how I'd done the edging. I showed them, hands followed mine, and for the first time in a long while, I felt useful again. I volunteered at the library 2 afternoons a week, children's hour mostly, little ones with sticky hands and round questions. One girl, Emily, asked if I was a witch because of my white hair. I laughed harder than I had in years. I began writing again. Just small entries in a leather journal Charles once gave me. Thoughts, fragments, recipes, bits of poetry I scribbled when the wind pressed against the windows. I felt myself return in layers. Meanwhile, Joan worked, behind the curtain, quietly and efficiently. She called one afternoon with a voice full of crisp excitement. Her name is Natalie, late 30s, historian, loves old homes and refuses to paint over natural wood. She's smitten with the place. I smiled into the phone. She sounds like the right kind of person. She's respectful, Joan confirmed. That house won't be gutted. It'll be honored. The closing date was set for a Thursday morning. Everything was moving quickly. Too quickly, Amanda. Would soon find. But I didn't call them. I didn't warn them. Why would I? They'd made their decisions without me. Now it was my turn. A week before the closing, I went back. I told Amanda I needed to retrieve a box from the attic. Old. Photos, I said. She barely looked up from her phone. Just don't make a mess, she muttered. Linda and Douglas were camped out in the living room, slippers on the coffee table, a game show blaring loud enough to rattle the floorboards. The smell of instant soup lingered in the air. My curtains were gone, replaced by plastic blinds. I climbed the stairs slowly, one hand grazing the rail. Each creak of the step sang of memory, midnight feedings, Christmas mornings, slow walks after surgeries, laughter echoing from rooms that no longer belonged to me. In the attic, I opened a dusty trunk and stared at the contents. An old baby, blanket, a chipped music box, Charles's college scarf, and a faded copy of Wuthering Heights with my maiden name still scribbled inside. I held the book to my chest and let the quiet wrap around me like a second skin. Before I left, I walked through the house. Not like a ghost. Not anymore. Like an owner surveying what had been borrowed. The dining room still held the long oak. Table Charles built by hand. They'd covered it with a plastic floral tablecloth. I pulled it back for a moment, just to run my fingers along the grain of the wood. It remembered me, even if they didn't. The garden had been neglected, overgrown, the hydrangeas sagging. But my bench was still there, the one where Charles and I used to sit with morning coffee. I brushed a few fallen petals from its surface and sat one last time. I whispered to the wind, to the memory of him in every leaf. You were never going to win, my dear. You just thought I'd forgotten how to fight. Amanda glanced at me as I walked out the front door with my small box. Hope you found what you needed, she said, voice laced with dismissal. I turned, smiled gently, and said, Oh, I did. Later that evening, back in my cottage, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and stared at the woman I'd become. Lines carved deep from years of love and silence. Hair white, soft as snow. Eyes still sharp. There was no rage, only a quiet. Storm, contained but certain. They had underestimated me. That was their mistake. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't begged. I'd simply remembered who I was. And now, so would they. The morning air was crisp, the kind that smells faintly of rain and promises change. I wore my best coat, the deep burgundy wool one Charles had once said made me look unapologetically regal. I buttoned it all the way up, tucked the deed into my handbag, and stepped out into the day like a woman who remembered her name. Joan picked me up in her silver sedan, punctual and polished as always. In Dury, the back seat sat Natalie, the buyer, a soft-spoken woman with intelligent eyes and a quiet grace that immediately made me trust her. She wore hiking boots and a scarf patterned with book spines. She looked at me and said gently, I love your house already. I smiled. Then take good care of her. We drove in silence, but not an uncomfortable one. It was the silence before. An orchestra begins, every string perfectly tuned, every horn poised to speak. When we pulled up to the house, the yard looked as I remembered. Tired, a little unkempt, but still holding on. My garden bench sat askew beneath the old maple, and the windows bore the smudges of hands that never truly cared for what they touched. I walked up the steps with Joan and Natalie at my side. 3 women, each holding her purpose. Amanda answered. The door. She wore a pink velour tracksuit and had a coffee mug that said Boss Babe in glittery letters. The moment she saw me, her brow furrowed. Nora, she said, blinking. Is something wrong? Natalie stepped forward with a warm but firm smile. Good morning. I'm Natalie. I'm the new owner of this property. We've completed closing. I'll be moving in next week. Amanda's jaw dropped. What? Joan handed her an envelope, a formal notice of sale and property transfer. You and your family will need to vacate the premises within 7 days, Joan said, her voice smooth as satin, as per the terms outlined in the deed held solely by Mrs. Green. Right on cue, Michael appeared at the hallway, barefoot, hair unkempt, looking like a man who had just awoken into a nightmare. Mom? He croaked. I reached into my bag, pulled out a copy of the deed, and handed it to him. I never sold this house to you, Michael. I let you live here because I believed in kindness. That kindness expired the day you stood by while I was pushed out. His hands trembled as he read it. I thought... No, I said softly. You didn't. Think. And that was the problem. Amanda's face had twisted now, red with fury, confusion, disbelief. You can't do this, she shouted, stepping forward. This is our house. It was never yours, I replied, calm as a lake before a storm. You were guests. You turned that gift into entitlement. And now, the door has closed. Her voice rose. We have nowhere to go. My parents... Behind her, Linda and Douglas stood awkwardly in the doorway, silent for once. Linda clutched a newspaper as if it were a shield. Douglas looked down at his shoes. Amanda sputtered. This is ridiculous. You're throwing your own son out? I turned to Michael. No, he threw me out. I'm simply setting the record straight. His lips parted, as if to argue. But he didn't. He couldn't, because the truth was sitting in his hands, inked, signed, notarized. And it didn't care for apologies offered too late. I hope, I said, taking one final look around the entryway, you find a place that suits your tastes, somewhere you can make your own decisions and live with them. Amanda looked ready to say more, to scream or cry or manipulate the air itself into rewriting history. But I'd already said everything I needed to. And so I turned, my heels clicking gently on the porch wood, and walked away. Not once did I look back. As we got into the car, Natalie placed her hand over mine. Are you all right? She asked. I met her eyes. I am. We pulled away slowly, leaving behind the house that had been built with love, then forgotten, then reclaimed. I watched the windows blur behind us. I thought of Charles, of the years, of the silence I had swallowed just to keep the peace. But now? Now there was peace because I had finally spoken. They thought I wouldn't remember how to fight. But I did. I just chose to do it with grace.